I need to double check to make sure it is recording from the microphone. Right. All right. Are there any questions from last time? Was everybody able to get a textbook, get an access code, at least to get into Cengage? No? Yep, go ahead.
I didn't sign up for Cengage, but I just got my book today, so.
Okay. Well, let me describe your homework assignment, and then we'll go from there. All right, first of all, you should have a Moodle account by now. If you do not have a Moodle account because you're on the wait list or you're beyond the wait list, you should send me an email with your name and your student ID so I can add you to Moodle. So you may not be on the roster officially, but at least you'll be able to do all the homework. So if you do not or cannot get log into Moodle just yet, you have to send me a message so that you can add, so that I can add you to Moodle, then you can view the homework. And in your in the subject line of your email, you might want to mention, add to cisc310, because I have a lot of students, trying to add from different classes. So, if I don't see, anything on the subject line, it makes it very difficult for me to decide, okay, but which class am I adding this student to? So it's got to be a little bit more clear on the subject line. And here's, after you log in, you will see the screen. Let me just zoom out a little bit so you can see on the other side what you will see. You should also see a calendar. The calendar has certain dates highlighted, like today. This is my other class which has a homework due today. And for you guys, this is due on Thursday. I can probably change the due date a little bit so that you guys have more time to at least get into Cengage and get started with the homework. So let's go ahead and go to the class site, and I'll show you how you can find your homework. Your homework will appear under upcoming events, but it will also appear under topic 1. Under topic 1, your homework is called Chapter 1 Chapter Quiz, and it is the same name over here under upcoming events. Are there any questions about where to find your homework assignments in Moodle? No questions? Okay. All right. So when you click on the homework, it will bring you to the description of the homework itself. In this particular case, this homework only requires you to go to Cengage and complete the chapter quiz of Chapter 1. The quiz has 25 questions, if I remember correctly, and I think you can reattempt it as many times as you want. Am I correct about that? Because some people have tried it already. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So don't worry about it. You can retry as many times as you want. And if you get an answer wrong, can anyone guess what Cengage will do? What the engine will do? Mark you down and go ahead.
Rearrange it when you reopen it.
It rearranges it when you reopen it, but it will also do something else. It gives you a page number. It will tell you which page has the content or the material, so you can review it.
Oh.
Yep. So that's pretty handy. You had a question?
No.
No? Okay. Let me log into Cengage first. I don't think my interface will look, yours will look the same, but it will be at least close. In your case, you have to use your W and then followed by your 7-digit student ID at imail.lostreals.edu. That's my instruction for you guys to sign in or to register for an account. And you'll be logging into Cengage Brain instead of dashboard. Yep.
When I signed up for the site to be able to buy the book, I used a different email address than because when you go to buy the book, you have to sign up for the site itself.
Oh, okay.
So I used a different email address.
Okay. I wonder
But
if
it's
you
very,
can change it.
it's rogers.james.c, so it's not like you're gonna know who I am, because I'm
Okay.
in the roster, so.
Okay, I will see. Well, this is the first time I use Cengage too, so I'll have to see how difficult it is to synchronize the rosters. Two things. Okay. So when you take a quiz, mine looks like this. I cannot actually go in and take the quiz, but it does show you how you can take the test. So in this case, you can take it as many times as you want. It will only keep the highest score, and it is graded. As far as we are concerned, this is your homework. Okay, it only makes up for a portion of the 20% of your homework. It is not your actual quiz. Okay, because you can spend as much time as you want to do it, and you can always refer to the book, while you're doing it. There's no time limit either. In other words, you can open up the test and just take your time, read the book as you take the test. Okay, that's not a problem. The bottom line is, I want you guys to read the book and understand the material. You can use Google to search for the terms or the definitions if you want. You can also read the book and try to answer the questions. Are there any questions about this part? No questions? Okay. I'm not going to do the other activities in this class for chapter 1. For the later chapters, I think some of these activities will be fun to do. But you are more than welcome to take on the extra quizzes and whatnot. I'm just not going to use that for grading purposes. Are there any questions at this point? Has anyone taken the pre-quiz? I know some people have taken all the quizzes. Okay, how do you like it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to use that for grading, only the chapter quiz. The chapter quiz is supposed to be taken after you have completed reading the entire chapter. Okay. And how many people are reading the book online? Not a whole lot. So a lot of people like the carbon type of a book.
So you can just go to Cengage and not buy the book, like a physical book?
You cannot buy the physical book from Cengage. If you want to buy the physical book, you have to go to the bookstore.
No, I'm saying like, can you just get the Cengage access code since it comes in an ebook?
Yes. If you go to Cengage, I have a link to it. If you go to the course, the class site, and then go to how to set up Cengage course mate. I think that's the one.
Yeah.
There is a link here. Maybe not here, right here. The ebook can be purchased at this link. So if you follow that link, you can pay for it and then purchase the ebook. When you purchase the ebook, it will give you an access code, and with the access code, you can register and get your online account. Yep.
So does the ebook, is it just an online ebook, or does it come with like a PDF?
It's online ebook.
The ebook
Sorry?
is in PDF format.
Oh, it is? Okay. But it's not very high resolution, if I remember correctly. It's kind of fuzzy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you prefer everything to be really crisp and sharp, the printed version is better. You're paying about $20 more for the for the package that includes the printed version and the CD. The online version, the all online version, is about $86 or so.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, it is kind of expensive. But I was told that I have to use this particular package for teaching this class.
You can buy the physical book from there, but it's way more. It's $124 if you buy the physical book from Cengage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Or you can buy from the
Yeah, it's
bookstore.
$106.93 over there.
Yep. And you're supporting the college.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions about how to get the access code so you can get into Cengage? I think about 17 people are in my class already on Cengage. So, the rest of you, you will have to do that soon in order to do this homework assignment. Any other questions regarding how to access Cengage? Now, with the book waiver thing, does it include ebooks like this, or this is exempt and they don't really do it? Nobody knows.
Book waiver. You're talking about the book voucher?
Yeah, the book voucher. Sorry.
I think the book voucher is only good at the store.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Only at the store. Yeah.
Only at the store?
Yeah.
So it's better to get the $106 dollar version in that case.
Yeah. Because otherwise you get paid for it.
Okay. Well, plus you get it right away, and the printed version can come in handy sometimes. Yep. All right. Are there any other questions about Chapter 1? We covered some of the material in Chapter 1, so let me go ahead and open up Chapter 1. We talked about this already, how we have a lot of computers already. We talked about the term digital. I referred to this picture a few times, and I mentioned how the name digital revolution is actually misleading because it has very little to do with digital, but it has more to do with automation. Can we do things automatically so that we don't need people doing something on the other end? A very good example is when you use your cell phone to do anything. I mean, if you use a cell phone to go to Amazon.com to order something, do you think a person is actually on the other side to handle your order? No. How about shipping? That has got to involve some people, right? So people going to the shelf, getting the package down. I think that part is fully automatic too. So they have robots to go through the aisles. As long as people, when they replenish, as long as they shelf things correctly, the robots can go to the right shelf, pick up the item, and I think the final packaging may be a person packaging the final item. But even in the final packaging, what kind of box they need to use for a particular product, that part I think is automated too. In other words, the computer will automatically suggest, use this size of box for this particular product. So it's pretty much all automated. Let me turn off the phone first, so I don't become the first one with my phone ringing. Are there any questions so far? Because I just want to emphasize, what we call digital revolution has a lot to do with automation and not so much with the digital technology. Do you guys still remember, what I call? Do you still remember the discussion of binary? A little bit. How I said, you already know how to do binary numbers, you just don't know it.
Yeah.
Okay. So let me close the door first, and then we'll continue with the discussion of binary numbers. So this part, I'm just going to do it on the whiteboard instead of, well, maybe not. I can just do it on the computer too. So this part will be at least in the screen recording. And what I do is I just use a notepad. It's called a mouse pad, but it serves the same purpose. And I just want to make sure that my recording is still going. All right, it is. All right, so let's go ahead and try to do some conversion, and you guys can tell me how to do it. And we want to use binary numbers this time. So what I want is to give somebody $30.75. Okay, that's the change. Okay, somebody bought something. I need to make a change of $30.75. But unlike the currency system that we use, we don't have there's no dime. Okay, there's no nickel. There are no $5 bills. Instead, we have $1, $2, $4, $8, $16 bills, and then we have half dollars, quarters, $1/8, and so on and so forth. So how are you going to do this? You open up the cashier's drawer, and then you see all these bills. What are you going to do first? 30. The biggest number that is still less than or equal to 30. So what is a power of 2 that is less than or equal to 30? The largest power of 2. 2 to the power of 4, which is 16. Very good. So we are going to give one $16 bill, and then we will have $14.75 left. So with the $14.75 left, we'll do the same thing. So which power of 2 should we use? 3. Okay, so that's 8. Okay, so let me just write this down. This is 2 to the power of 4. the caret means to the power of. And after $24, I will have $6.75 left. What should I use next? 4? Okay, so that's 2 to the power of 2. And then we have $2.75 left. Just a 2, okay? So 2 is 2 to the power of 1. Then we'll have 75 cents left. What do we do with 75 cents?
$8.
I think I did I do the math right? Yeah, it is. Okay. So with the 75 cents, which power of 2 is the largest one that is still less than or equal to 3/4, basically? Minus 1. Very good. But you're thinking in the right direction. 2 to the power of, let's have $1, because that's 2 to the power of -1. Very good. And then we'll have a quarter left. What is a quarter?
2 1 minus 2.
Yep. It's 2 to the power of -2. Exactly. So now we have a binary number. You just don't look at it as a binary number, but it is a binary number. Okay? Are we doing okay so far? How we come up with these bills and coins? Is that okay? All right. Is that easier than the money system that we have, or is it harder?
It's a little harder.
It's harder only because we are used to having, nickels and dimes and $5 bills and so on, and it's just a matter of habit, okay? But in terms of the actual system, this is way easier. There's no division. There's no division involved. When you look at a number, all you have to do is to compare it to the largest power of 2 that is less than or equal to that number. There's no division. But when you deal with base 10 or the money system that we have, there is division involved. $30 divided by 20. Okay, that's one $20 bill, and then $10 bill, and so on. All right, but how do we turn this into an actual binary number? Well, let's see. Well, instead of looking at binary numbers, let me ask you, if I give you a decimal number like 68.45, okay? And we'll just use money because people always remember how to handle money. Maybe not so much with actual numbers. All right, so we have $68.45. What does that mean? What does the 6 mean in this number? 6 of what? 6 of tens, okay, 6, okay. So let's go ahead and rewrite this number in a way so that we know it is 6 times 10 plus, what is the 8?
1.
8 of ones. What about the 4? 4 dimes, okay, or 0.1s. And the 5 would be the number of cents, which is 5. This 1 0 here. Is this part okay? The asterisk means multiplication because there's no multiplication symbol on the keyboard. Yep. Oh, I missed something. Thank you. Very good. Is that part okay? Do you think most elementary school students can do that? Probably. Okay, just break up a number into its components. But it is important because now we are remembering what 68.45 mean, because it means 6 of 10 plus 8 of ones plus 4 of tenths and 5 of hundreds. All right. So next we'll look at these as powers of 10. What is 10?
10
To the power of 1, right? What about 1 itself? 1 is 10 to the power of 0. Very good. And then we have a 4 times 10 to the power of, in this case, -1, because a tenth is 10 to the power of -1. And then we have 5 times 10 to the power of -2. Why do you think I performed this particular step?
So you can see the powers.
So we can see the series of powers, okay? In this case, we have powers of 10. What about the binary number that we have up there a little bit? So now I can rewrite 30.75 as a sum of 1 times 2 to the power of 4 plus 1 times 2 to the power of 3 plus 1 times 2 to the power of 2 plus 0 times 2. Yep, I'm still good. Okay. plus 1 times 2 to the power of 1 plus 0 times 2 to the power of 0 because we don't have any 1s here. And then plus 1 times 2 to the power of negative 1 plus 1 times 2 to the power of negative 2. And let me resize the screen a little bit so we can see it better. All right. Now here comes the part that can be the most confusing part. How would I represent 2 to the power of 4 but using a base 2 system? Okay, this is the most confusing part because it is 1, 0, 0, 0, 0 in base 2. The 2 in parentheses indicate this is not a base 10 number. It is not 10,000. It is 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, but in base 2. But does it make any sense in base 2? Well, let's take a look. In base 2, this is still telling me how many 1s I have. This is still telling me how many, oh wait, does it tell me how many 10s we have? Or does it tell me how many 2s that we have? This is base 2. It's how many 2s. So the next one tells me how many 4s, how many 8s, and how many 16s. Are we doing okay so far with this? Now, the next number is going to be 1, 0, 0, 0. In other words, how many, the power of 2 dictates how many zeros that we have. But haven't we seen that before? The power dictates the number of zeros. What about the base 10 number? 10 is 10 to the power of 1, and therefore we have 1, 0. 10 to the power of 0 is 1. There's no 0 in it. Okay? And then on the negative side, the negative number tells me how many places after the decimal point I should put a digit. So with this one, I can just keep on doing it like this. We have 1, 0, 0 for 4, which is 2 to the power of 2. And then we have 1, 0, which is 2, which is 2 to the power of 1. And then we have 0, which is because we don't have any 1s. And then we have that looks kind of strange. We have 0.1 in base 2. But remember, 0.1 in base 2 is not 1/10. Instead, it is 1/2. Because it is 1 times 2 to the power of negative 1. Okay, the number of places to the right-hand side of the decimal point is, the negative power. And then plus 1.01 in base 2. I have to emphasize that everything is in base 2. But when you add these numbers together, we have 1.1110.11 in base 2. This part is really just the notation. The most important part you have to understand is this part here. How do we come up with the number of 16, 8, 4, 1, 16, 8, 4, 2, 1, half, and quarter bills and coins? That's the most important part. The number representation part is kind of tedious because we have to understand why this is representing 2 to the power of 4, but that's the same way that we do things with base 10 too, because how do you write a million in base 10? 1 followed by how many zeros? 6 zeros. But 1 million also turns out to be 10 to the power of what? 6. That's it. And it works in base 2 too. It's the same principle. Okay? Are there any questions about this slide? It is all being recorded, so you can actually replay it. Or if you want to, you can go online and search for binary number conversion tutorial. There has to be tons of those tutorials. And besides, I'm not going to ask you questions about your binary conversion because your calculator can do it. I will never ask you anything that your calculator can do. There's no point.
So 30.75 is 1110.11. That's how 30.75 is represented in the binary system, right?
That is correct. Exactly. Yep. But does it make sense? Instead of making.
There's decimals too.
Hmm?
There's still decimal point.
Yep. Well, I guess we should not call it decimal point. It's binary point now.
Okay.
Yep.
So in binary, the ones and zeros in binary represent like a place for instance, starting at the decimal from right to left, the first digit would represent a power of 2. If it's 0, then there's no
Yep.
power, and if there is, then it's 2 to the power of 1.
Yep. Each place of the number represents how many, the quantity of a particular power of 2. So let me just go back here. This tells me how many powers of 0, 2 to the power of zeros do we have. This represents how many 2 to the power of 1s do we have. 2 to the power of 2, 2 to the power of 3, 2 to the power of 4. But on the other side, we have 2 to the power of -1 and 2 to the power of -2. But that's not new, to me, because this tells me how many 10 to the power of 1s. This tells me how many 10 to the power of zeros, and this tells me how many 10 to the power of -1 and to the power of -2. So we have been using something like this all along. It's just that the base has changed. Instead of using base 10, we are no longer using base 10, we're now switching to base 2. Okay? How many people think base 2 is just weird and is too much? We should not be using base 2. You guys are just shy, I know. You guys are looking at this going like, why would we want to use base 2? Well, remember when you first learned how to do addition and multiplication? Okay? How do you know this? And let me ask you this. Okay, how do you know that 23 plus 18 is, okay, how do we figure out this particular digit here? 3 plus 8 is 1 with a carry of 1, right? But how do you know that? How do you know 3 plus 8 is 11? There are lots of stuff that you had to do, right? You had pictures, you had those blocks, and for the most part, it's memorization. Okay? I don't see anyone counting their fingers in the class. That means you have already memorized that 3 plus 8 is 11. Or, in this case, I would call that 1 with a carry of 1. What about multiplication? Why do you know that 6 times 7 is 42 in base 10? Why? Well, fortunately, I don't see anyone actually doing the finger counting. That would be quite tedious. Okay? Adding 7 6 times to get to 42 can be quite tedious. But what about when you first learned it in elementary school? Is there any trick to it? No. You just have to memorize it, right? Do it enough times, and then your brain just memorizes it. What if we switch to base 2? Now, remember, in base 2, every digit in the binary number can either be a 0 or a 1. Cannot be a 2, cannot be a 3. Only 0 and 1. Doesn't that really help to simplify the multiplication table? Seemingly. Your multiplication table becomes 1 times 0. Okay, let's be more systematic. 0 times 0 is 0. Does that really depend on the base 2, base 10?
Not really.
No, 0 is 0. How about 1 times 0? Anything times 0 is 0. What about 0 times 1? 0. What about 1 times 1? 1. That's your multiplication table. That's it. That's your multiplication table. So you don't have to spend all that time to remember, I know there are tricks to remember the multiplication table, but even so, there are still a lot of entries where you just have to memorize. What about addition? 0 plus 0 is 0. Does that depend on the base? No. What about 1 plus 0? 1. Does that depend on the base? 0 plus 1? Let's say it's 1. The only tricky one is this one because it is 1, 0 in base 2. That's the only tricky one, and that's it. You are done with remembering single-digit addition and single-digit multiplication. That's all that you have to remember. And I know this is election year, and I'm not supposed to say anything about who I would endorse and stuff like that. But if I were to run for office, I will first promote, switching from base 10 to base 2. Because the kids will love it. And then they'll tell their parents to vote for me. Yeah, no need to remember the multiplication table. Yeah! That's a new platform, huh? I for the longest time I wanted to use on my car I want to get a sticker bumper sticker. Sorry, the words just kind of get flipped in my mind. With the Emperor from Star Wars and Darth Vader, I would choose those two as president and vice president. But seemingly they are running the empire fairly efficiently.
Yeah, they got everyone scared out of their wits.
No, the rebels are still running around, and
Yeah, the rebels are, but they can get away. Where's the Empire? You're dead. Fuck up.
All right. Are there any questions so far about this base conversion? I'm not going to teach you guys or have you guys to know how to do multiplication in base 2 or addition in base 2. But for the most part, what you already know about base 10 works. It's just a whole lot easier because there's less to memorize. It only feels difficult because we are not used to it. That's all. But the basics of using base 2 is already there. If you know how to use base 10, base 2 is easier, way easier. And guess what? It is also easier for the computer. Why do you think it's easier for the computer? I think the book actually explains that too.
They don't have to process as much information.
You still have to store the same amount of information, so that part is not, saved. Yep.
Each digit becomes a true-false statement between 1 and 0.
Or in the case of a transistor, whether it's on or off. You never have to say how on is this transistor. It's just on or off. Now, why would that be a good thing? Why would that be a good thing that we don't have to say, okay, the transistor is on, but it's only partially on. It's 1/3 on, or it's 3/4 on. Why do you think just being on off is better than having to know how on it is? Yep.
Well, kind of like glass is half full, glass is half empty. Depends on your perspective. A little bit, your half could be a little bit more or a little less than someone else's, and the computer would go like, well, how much is a half? I'm going to half of this much, half of that much. Someone's got to have to tell them all these different parameters, and it just takes up a lot of time and space.
It's also more difficult to determine. Okay, now think of it this way. Think of using semaphores. Okay, in this case I'll use a flag. Okay, so you're across on the other side of across a lot of distance. Okay. And let's think about the binary system. The binary system basically says, is he holding a flag or is he not holding a flag? Because it's either there or not, 1 or 0, right? But when you're using base 10, then it's not really just whether there's a flag or not. It's how big is the flag? Is the flag only 1/10 of the original size, 2/10 of the original size, 3, 4, all the way up to the entire flag? Because that's there are 10 levels to how much I want to extend the flag, right? Okay, so now from the observer's perspective, can you, over a long distance, can you easily determine whether it's 3/10 or 4/10 of the flag on or extended? It will be pretty difficult. How about whether it's on or not? You can probably can still tell from a long distance away whether the flag is, whether I'm holding up the flag or not. And it's exactly the same thing in computers, because now you can transmit information faster because it's just either there or not. Is the voltage high or is the voltage low? Is there a hole on the CD-ROM or is there not a hole on the CD-ROM? It's not how big of a hole it is. It's just whether it is there or not. Okay, so it is because of these reasons that binary numbers are very useful on computers. Are there any questions at this point about binary numbers versus base 10? Is everybody convinced that the base 2 is easier? Sort of. That one is hard because we are so used to base 10. But if you learn only base 2 to begin with, and then you have to learn base 10 later, it is a lot harder to learn base 10 after base 2. Any questions? No questions? Okay. So let me just kind of keep moving on because these are the slides that we have already gone through. Oh, you just timed me out. The interesting part is it's not like the entire site timed me out, it's just, the ebook portion timed me out. We talked about intellectual property, we talked about patents. The digital divide is narrowing as the prices of digital devices fall and as inexpensive handheld devices acquire more features. Now this is interesting because they show someone from possibly a third world country, but looking at the picture you can never know. But I'm guessing they're using this picture to make a point that third world country people are now using cell phones. In China, my wife just came back from China, after a long trip. They have more cell phones than landlines. Can anyone imagine why? I mean, to us, a phone, a landline phone, seems to be less expensive than a cell phone. Yep.
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure, that's right. What is the kind of infrastructure we're looking at with traditional landline, copper landline?
Well, you have to have towers, and you also have to have base stations on
Base
top of the
stations,
towers.
a lot of wires.
A lot of wires underground, above
Mhm.
ground.
Yep.
A bunch of people to maintain that.
Yep.
Whereas with cell phones, all you need is a tower and a base station, and that's it.
Exactly. And that's why, in a lot of countries where they did not have the infrastructure like, the United States, has, they will use, they leapfrog. They just forget about, they just do not use any wired technology. They just skip it and use wireless technology because it is so much easier to set up. It's also a lot less expensive, okay? Because the traditional wire, copper wire with telephones, it's actually more expensive to maintain that than maintaining cell towers. And also the cost per call is actually higher with a real copper wire compared to using a digital cell phone technology. How many people use a DSL at home? Okay, and do you know that your speed depends on the quality of your phone line? If you live very far away from the station, the base station, your bandwidth, how much information you transmit per time, is going to be lower. Okay, and that's because copper wire, or at least the copper wire that they use for phone lines was never designed for high-speed communication. They're actually just really pushing the technology to get to get the bandwidth that they're getting right now. What about the cost of cell phones? I mean, T-Mobile, want to charge me $400, if I don't want to go for a 2-year contract and stuff like that. If I want to get a unlocked phone, it would cost me a few $100. But what about the cost of actually making a phone like that? I mean, you guys all have a smartphone. What do you think is the cost of making a cell phone like this?
$50?
Hmm?
25, something like that.
I don't know for sure, but I'm guessing the actual cost of making something like this is less than 40. At the quantities that they're making. Yep.
The biggest thing you have to remember about the cost of cell phones is that they're produced in the countries where those components are made.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like, everybody likes to relate it to computer cost.
Mhm.
We import the technology from other countries. So when you go to the source and make something, it's much cheaper.
Mhm.
So you're probably looking at maybe $25 to $30 for a cell phone. For an iPhone 4S, probably
Mhm.
$25 to $30.
The cost of it is only that much. Yep. So how come I'm charged like $400 if I want to buy an unlocked phone?
Because it's worth more.
Exactly, it is worth more. Okay, that's the most important part of, I guess, capitalism is the cost versus the price. The cost is really how much it takes to make something. but the price is set to how much people will continue to pay in order to use it. Okay? So that's why in a third world country, these cell phones, it's not going to cost these people hundreds of dollars. And the monthly fee, is not going to be $50 US a month either. How many people like to text? I haven't seen anyone texting in the class, so that's a good sign. But a lot of people text. How much does your carrier charge you for texting? A little bit, right? A little more than the voice line, right?
I've got
No?
straight talk. I've got straight talk.
You get straight
Pay a
talk?
base price every month.
But the cost of texting should be none. Because they're using, in the communication between a cell phone and a cell tower, they're only using something that has to go on in order to send text messages. In other words, it's supposed to be free. Now, when you call someone, you are actually actively using resources that is limited to your carrier. So when you make a voice call, it's supposed to cost something because you are using a certain bandwidth of the network in order to make that call. But when your phone is quote unquote sitting idle, like right now nobody is making a call, it's still in constant communication with a cell tower. The text messages is just piggybacking on that little traffic using very little bandwidth that has to go on anyway between your cell phone and the cell tower. In other words, it is quote unquote free. It has to be there anyway. And yet, if you don't go for a plan that includes texting, how much do they want to charge you per message? 5 cents, 10 cents, something like that? And that's absurd. It's almost as absurd as the computer lab charging you 10 cents per page when you print. Yep.
Actually becoming more common knowledge. AT&T and Verizon no longer, well, starting soon, will no longer have like a specific plan that just offers minutes and text. Minutes and text will not be included. You just pay for the data. So you just pay like a base price just to have the service.
Yeah.
And then you pay for data chunks.
And that makes a lot of sense because what if you want to make an international phone call and your cell phone doesn't have an international phone call plan? What do you do? Skype, Google Voice, and so on and so forth. I mean, those are really inexpensive. Can anyone guess how much it costs to call China per minute?
5 cents.
From like just say
From the United States, yeah.
Probably about $1.75 a minute.
No? No, going through Google Voice.
Oh, probably not.
2 cents. 2 cents per minute, and the quality is as good as calling New York, if not better. There's a little bit of lag, so if you're in a heated argument with somebody, it probably won't work very well. I mean, but on the other hand, if you're just carrying on a normal phone conversation, it's more than sufficient. I thought that would be more lag than I actually experienced, but it turned out to be great. I mean, it's 2 cents per minute.
So what are your internet speed determined?
Your internet speed will determine that, but since I have a data plan, I just go through the data plan to make a phone call. Because when you set up your phone to use Google Voice, every time you make a call, you can actually select, do you want to make that call through Google Voice or just use the cell phone's own calling capabilities. So if your phone doesn't have, let's say you only have like 3 minutes, quote unquote 3 minutes after 9 and before 6 a.m. and only the weekends, and during the day you want to make a long phone call to somebody and you have unlimited data plan, Google Voice will basically be free. Because within the United States, I think it's all free. Yep. But that really tells you, it's reinforcing this picture, of, cell phones are actually inexpensive because the digital technology is inexpensive. And before I forget, which I usually do, I'm going to pass the row sheet. Trying to remember which one is this class. I can just look at the wait list, it's fine. Yep, it's this one. If your name is not here, just write it down and put your sign. Print your name and then sign it next to it. All right. I don't think we have spent too much time on this part here, have I? No, not on this picture.
No.
Okay, what this picture is talking about is, quote unquote digital devices. I just call everything computers. What you call it is not important, because somebody's come up with some really neat marketing terms and change the way we call something. When you look at computers, we'll go ahead and look at this side first, the red side. Every single computer has all these components. Every computer is processing some kind of data, but how do you get the data to process? You need some kind of input, okay? You need some kind of input to process the data. After you process the data, you also need an output. So the input and output components of a computer has to be there. Okay, so the input and the output has to be there. Most computers will also have a storage, so that not only can you process input on the fly, but you can also store information. But that's not always the case. For instance, the earlier anti-lock brake controllers do not store anything because they're just reactive. In other words, they monitor how fast your wheel is rotating. They monitor how much you're pressing the brake pedal, and some other parameters. And then based on that, it will pulse the caliper to make sure that your wheel doesn't lock. Is it wrong? Is the wrong one? Oh, I actually picked the wrong one. Then it has to be this one. Give it a try. It cut off the top, so I couldn't see which class it's for. But a lot of computers now, they do store everything, including the engine control unit of your car. It stores, all the parameters, especially when there's a fault, it pings too much, or the engine temperature exceeds a certain amount. It actually takes a snapshot of the environment of all the parameters, at the time when your engine overheats. So it does store a lot of information. This part has to be there, okay? Because every computer has to run a program. The instructions to tell the computer what to do has to be stored somewhere. So this component has to be there. In other words, if you think of a person, as a computer, the input would be my ears, my eyes, my nose for smelling, my skin for tactile sensing and stuff like that. The output would be the control of muscles. Okay. What about the stored program? What would be equivalent to the stored program as a person? Memory. How do I know how to do something? How do I know how to wash the dishes or do laundry? Those instructions are stored here, and the computer has specific storage just to store the computer, just to store the instructions. But I also have other types of storage too. In addition to knowing how to do something, I also remember other things like the license plate of my cars, which I actually don't remember. Okay, birth date of my wife, that I do remember. That's kind of important, right? Yeah, but I remember that kind of thing. I have storage. Now, when you look at the other side here, look at the purple ones. The purple bubbles. They have mainframes, personal computers, workstations, video game consoles, handheld devices, servers, and supercomputers. I look at this and go like, well, I don't know. I mean, a computer is a computer. How you make a computer to serve a particular purpose is not that important. Okay, it really is not. Well, let's take a look at this picture here and look at mainframes. What is a mainframe? Do we still have mainframes today? We just don't call them mainframes anymore. What do we call those? We just call those servers and supercomputers. So a lot of these terms are somewhat arbitrary and historical. In other words, they're not really that important. I really do not think the terms are that important. What about personal computers? PCs, tablets. But if you're an Apple person, you'll be pretty mad because there's no I something here at all. Where's the iPad? Where's the iPod? Where's the iPhone?
The iBook.
Huh? The iBook. So but that really tells you so much. That really tells you that the terms are really nothing more than terms. Things that people invent to call something that name. What about the Apple II computer? How many people have seen an Apple II computer? It's not a personal computer. It's not a workstation. It's not a video game console. It's not a handheld device. As far as I know, I would not call it handheld. It's not a server. It's not a supercomputer. So once again, it's just labels. Okay, so I would not bother too much with these labels. Any questions about this? What about the embedded computers? Computers that are on your car or inside the refrigerator. It doesn't show up here either. So a term is really just a term. Now, since we mentioned that, go ahead.
I have a cool story about supercomputers. The Air Force recently built a supercomputer out of like
PS3s,
like a couple thousand or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It costs like $20 million, which is like significantly less than
Chump
any other,
change.
Yeah,
Yeah.
any other supercomputer in the world.
Yep.
It's the 54th fastest supercomputer in the world.
That's actually what I want to bring up next. What do you think? Well, but I'm not going to bring it up that way. What do you think is common between servers and handheld devices? In other words, that super duper computer of Lawrence Livermore National Lab that can do particle simulation and all the cool stuff. What is common between that and your cell phone?
Wireless.
Maybe, but that's not the main point. The processor. The processor. Now you would think, but that doesn't make any sense, because a supercomputer is supposed to have a lot of processing resources. When you look at your cell phone, even with a quad-core, top of the line, Cortex, processor, it's still really no match for the latest i7 processor from Intel. Okay, there's really no comparison in terms of processing power. But why would a supercomputer, that has to do tons of processing, be using the same kind of processor that is on a cell phone? Well, to understand that, you have to understand what limits how much processing power a data center can actually possess. In other words, if I give you a room about this size, okay, and that's the only constraint, I can give you basically close to infinite amount of money. Okay, I can give you close to infinite amount of energy. Okay, in other words, energy is not a problem. I can put a nuclear power plant right next to you. Not that you want that arrangement. I can give you, but the size is the room, and the air conditioning is limited. In other words, we only have the latest greatest technology to extract heat out of the room. Which part do you think is the limitation of how much processing power we can pack into a room of this size?
Cooling.
The cooling, exactly. The heat is the problem. Now that was not the problem before. Before, the problem has to do with actual processing power, and that's why we use a lot of big processors in the past. But now these days, it is how much heat you can extract out of the room. Okay. So instead of looking at MIPS, which is million of instructions per second, or FLOPS, which is floating point operations per second, we are now looking at instructions, or how much processing you can do per watt. Not per second, but per watt. In other words, how green is your processor? It's interesting, isn't it? Okay. So when you look at an Intel processor, it has a lot of processing power, right? So if you look at the i7 processor, running at 2 gigahertz clock, what kind of processing power are we looking at in terms of million of instructions per second? Well, it has 4 cores, and then each core has two
hyper-threaded cores.
Yep. So it has, in theory, it has almost
Four
like
logical and 4 hyper-threaded.
So you have to look at, well, we'll just call this X, okay? X MIPS. MIPS stands for million instructions per second. Okay? But how many watts is it taking? The i7 is what, an 80 watt processor?
TDP is like 95.
95? We'll call it 100. So it is using 100 watts, which is 100 joules per second in terms of energy per second use. And then you look at a Cortex processor. Okay, the Cortex processor will be the same kind of processor you use on a cell phone, a tablet, that sort of mobile devices. And let's just say that it is x divided by I don't know. Let's call it x divided by 10 MIPS. In other words, this is just made up. Okay, I don't know the exact number, but I'm just calling this 1/10 of the processing power of an i7 processor. But when you look at the energy it's actually consuming, I'm just making this up to kind of make the point. Let's just say it's only using 5 watts for 1/10 of the processing power of the Intel i7 processor. Now when you, sorry, go ahead.
When you use 10 Cortex processors, you're still at half the power it requires to.
Exactly. That is exactly the point. That's okay. Let me just say that again. Let me just summarize what you said.
Sorry.
No, that's good. I like you guys when you just know what it is about, and just go ahead of me, go ahead of the class. In the case of an i7 processor, I can do x million instructions per second, but I'm going to use 100 watts. Now, when you use 100 watts, each second is 100. It will consume. This is a physics unit. Joules is a measurement of energy. This one will only use 5 joules per second, even though the processing power is only 1/10 of the i7 processor. But when you have a really big application that has a lot of computation going on, you have a certain amount of instructions you have to execute. So in the end, okay, let's just look at a particular application. Let's say I have one particular application that it really doesn't matter, because if the Cortex approach, if I were to make up if I want the same processing power, I would have to multiply this by 10, because I would need 10 of these to make up one single i7 processor. Is that okay? But 5 times 10 is only 50. So when you look at the energy consumption, it's only consuming 50 joules per second. But in this case, it will have the same amount of MIPS as the Intel processor. What do you think is consuming all this energy? I mean, a processor is not a mechanical device. Okay, with a mechanical device, you can kind of think, okay, all the energy is converted into mechanical energy, like a car, is a mechanical device. But this is all electronics. There's nothing moving. You would hope that nothing is moving on the motherboard or inside the processor. What is this energy going? Why do you need that 1 kilowatt 1 kilowatt power supply unit for your gaming computer? I know you have a lot of fans inside the case, but I don't think your fans are using 1 kilowatt. 1 kilowatt, all going to fans would make it sound like a jet engine. What is this energy converting from electrical form into what form? Heat, exactly. Okay, most of this energy is not used for actually doing any work or computing. It's actually dissipated as heat. So that means with an Intel processor, to do the same amount of work, I have to find a way to dissipate 100 watts of power. Otherwise, the room will get hotter and hotter, and then everything will shut down. But with the Cortex approach, I will only be dissipating 50 watts. So that means within the same room with the same cooling technology, I can pack twice the processing power. Is that making any sense? And that is why supercomputers are actually sharing the same type of processor as handheld devices. How many of you have an Xbox 360? Okay. Have you guys ever heard of the overheating issue when they first came out?
Still have it.
Still have it?
It forced the motherboard and the heat sinks to get so hot. The heat sinks had to be refastened down to try to get rid of the red ring of death.
And heat is the #1 killer of semiconductor components. Okay. What about PS3? How many people have a PS3 at home? Does it run hot? Yeah. Does it run as hot as your Xbox?
Runs hotter.
It runs hotter?
Because they try to make it cooler by having more air vents, but because of that, it actually consumes more dust. So
okay.
the airflow, by you consuming in more dust, as the heat is rising, it actually creates even more heat.
Okay.
And it creates a burning smell if you don't clean it out every once in a while.
It's the dust bunnies. Huh?
Yeah, the dust bunnies. Yeah. They accumulate dust.
Blame it on the bunnies. So in this case, you do have a killer bunnies. That's a game, by the way. Yeah, there's a kid game. It's called Killer Bunny. It's a card game. Do you guys know about that game? Killer Bunnies. It's funny. It's really fun. But without the dust, would it still be as hot as the Xbox?
Just about the same. Because they're
Just
both
about the same?
Actually, it might be even worse because the PS3 actually processes 3D images, and the Xbox doesn't. Not yet, at least.
Okay.
It's still running on. They try to make it more standard HD, so they go as high as 720. They don't go the full 1080p with 3D on.
Okay.
So it doesn't overclock as much as the Xbox does.
Okay.
So it still generates more heat.
But the technology is different too. I think.
Yeah, they use different technology.
Right.
It's easier for Microsoft to dissipate heat because they know they have to create programs. They make Windows, so they know in a PC when the program has to overclock on processing power, it overheats even faster. So they use a more personal computer type program, so it generates less heat on the processing side when you're playing games. So it's kind of like playing games on your personal computer rather than actually playing on a standalone video game complex system.
Okay. Now, how many processors are inside the PS3? Do you guys know?
Just the hexacore processor.
No, it's more than 4. It's more than 4. Those are called cell processors, but they share the same core as a Cortex processor. In terms of processing power and also in terms of scalability, the PS3 is actually more scalable because you have, I think there are 16 processors. One is dedicated as the manager, so that one balances the load of the other 15. But the whole thing was made up so that you can easily distribute processing resources evenly to all 15 processors in this case.
That's why it's able.
And then the Air Force realized that hey, there's a consumer box for $300-400, I don't know how much, but it's actually at a very large, big discount compared to dedicated processors for servers, and that's why they bought a whole bunch of PS3s. It's not like Air Force people do not like to play games. I'm pretty sure that was part of the factors too. It's like once we are done with this and this is obsoleted, we can still use it as a game system. But do you think they'll be running the PS3 operating system from Sony?
No.
They need, what do you think they're going to run? Linux.
Linux server.
Okay, they're going to run Linux on PS3s. Now, when you have an earlier PS3 without all the updates, there's a feature to let you run another operating system. Is that feature still there?
Yeah, if you homebrew.
Yeah. Yep. It's not there legally anymore. Okay. You can imagine. You can look it up. You can look up Air Force PS3 Sony, and then you'll dig up articles about how the Air Force is basically upset because Sony decides, okay, you guys cannot run your own operating system anymore, not legally, and that just doesn't sit well with the Air Force. Are there any questions at this point about all this stuff? No? Okay. Well, but I have a question. If these processors is really so good, it is so frugal in terms of energy, I want this kind of processor in a PC too. I mean, it just makes sense, right? Then your PC will run cooler, your laptop computer will last longer on batteries, and so on and so forth. So it's not only benefiting these supercomputers where the limiting factor is how much heat you can get rid from the room. I can put the same type of processor inside that box, on my PC, and my PC will consume half the amount of energy when I'm running normal applications. That's good. I don't see it as a bad thing. Why not?
Takes too much
Less
space.
space, yeah.
Hmm?
Takes more space.
No, that's not an issue. I mean, because the the space consumed by the Intel processor has a lot to do with the big heat sink that it needs. So even though Intel can probably make the chip a whole lot smaller, it cannot, because your heat sink has to be like this big. So it makes no sense to reduce the size of the processor die itself.
The new Intel i7s are 25 nanometers, which is like the size of your pinky nail.
Yeah, but the heat sink is still about this big.
The base that's actually sitting on top is actually, like you said, is for the heat sink to sit on.
Well, there are two things. One, it would be the heat sink, and two, when was the last time you counted the number of pins on the back of the processor?
2011.
There's a lot, right? So with that many pins, how do you insert the processor chip onto the motherboard reliably? Well, you need space. You need a lot of space just to put all the contact points on the back of the integrated circuit so that a consumer like ourselves can put it into the socket carefully but still make it work correctly. Now, if they increase the density of the pins, it becomes easier and easier to misalign things. And you don't want to misalign anything when your processor is consuming 90 watts. Bad things can happen. And then number two is the heat sink. How big is your heat sink inside your computer? For people who put your own PC together. Pretty big, right?
Yeah.
I use a cooling block.
Like liquid cooling? Well, you can also dunk the whole thing into a fish tank and fill it with oil.
Non-conductive material. Non-conductive, any type of
Non-conductive material, and you can also get transformer oil. There's a special kind of oil that people put into big transformers, and that kind of thing does not oxidize, and it's insulating.
And it's the most efficient heat distribution.
Yep. But there's a problem with using oil as cooling. In other words, if you dunk the motherboard into a tank of oil, let's say you're using the best kind of oil for that purpose, and the oil itself is not a problem. What do you think is another problem? What about all those things all the wires you have to run from the motherboard to something else? Okay, your keyboard or power supplies or the cable to your hard drive, your SATA cable and stuff like that. Why do you think that might be a little problem there? It's okay, I can put the fish tank here and my hard drive up here, so that should not be a problem, right? Yes? No?
You
Kind
have
of?
to keep impurities out of the oil. The case has to be sealed, and then you put the oil in.
Yeah.
That's after the motherboard's there.
Yeah.
And if you don't have it sealed, what will happen is you'll actually cause the thing to fry if
Yeah.
you get any impurities inside the oil.
Yeah, but oil is pretty good. It's not like water, because water can dissolve a lot of impurity, causing the water to be conductive. But oil is a non-polar liquid. It does not dissolve the kind of stuff that can conduct electricity. The problem has to do with, okay, let me just kind of, when you look at a tree, the roots are all the way down there. That's where the water is, right? So how does that water get up to the leaves and the fruits at the top of the tree?
Getting charged.
Travels up the trunk.
It's called a capillary action. There's a name for it, okay? If you put tissue paper, if you just roll tissue paper into a roll and dip it into water, the water actually seeps up, right? It's the same action. So think about the setup where you use a fish tank filled with oil, with a motherboard, and then you're running cable from the motherboard to the components. Oil will eventually travel up, even though the tank may be lower than let's say your corded mouse. One of these days, your mouse will feel greasy, because that oil will come through the cable, and at some point it will get out to the other side of the cable. So that's one of the problems too. Well, if you use Bluetooth stuff, then you'll be safe, because you can you can put plug your Bluetooth into a USB connector and then forget it. Just let it sit in the tank.
You never have to change the oil.
Hmm?
You never have to change the oil.
Not really that frequently, because the transformers are a far more critical application And even in those applications, they don't have to change the oil that often. They do have to monitor the oil. They have special programs and special people to go around to check the quality of transformer oil. But for the most part, they're very long lasting. Okay, but getting back to where we were, why don't these PCs start to use the same processor in a cell phone to reduce power consumption? Well, let me ask you another question. Every processor has its own instruction set. An instruction set is basically the processor in my cell phone understands instructions in a particular language. The Intel processor understands the instructions in another language. Okay, is that doing okay so far? So Intel processors they use a particular instruction set, a particular language, and then your cell phone processor uses another. Why would that be a problem if I decide to switch my PC from using an Intel processor to a ARM-based processor, which speaks a different language?
The processors wouldn't understand the information that's being sent to them.
None of your programs will work correctly,
And
right?
Windows will crash and you have to reinstall it.
Windows will crash. Okay, well that seems to be a problem, right? Because Windows only run on Intel platforms, and iOS and also Android runs on another platform. But if you run Linux, okay, I run Linux, you can see that Linux can run on just practically any platform, including platforms that are still in the works. Okay, the silicon is not even out yet, and you can have Linux running in simulation on those chips. Okay, so why do you think it's a problem? I mean, if I switch out the Intel processor here and use a Cortex processor, can't Microsoft just do the same thing and I have to stop a little bit here because I was going to use the word recompile, and then I have to explain what is recompiling. When we write programs, do you think I want to write a program in zeros and ones?
Not really.
Oh, I want to do an add. Oh, that instruction is 0 1 1 0 1 0 1 0 0 0 1 1 0 0 1. Okay, if I want to do multiplication, it is another long string of zeros and ones. Okay, that's what the processor understands. Is one long sequence of zeros and ones means add, another one means multiplication, another one means compare, and so on and so forth. Okay. So I don't want to write programs, specifying all these tiny little instructions in zeros and ones. What do I want to use? A high-level programming language. Okay, that's also in chapter 1. A high-level programming language where I can use almost English words like if, then, for, next, repeat, until, that sort of thing. So, but that language is completely foreign to the processor. The processor has absolutely no idea what if means. Okay, so how do I bridge this disconnect? I want to use a particular language that's friendly to humans, but the processor can only understand zeros and ones. A translation, okay, very good. A translation. A compiler is nothing more than a translator. It's a one-shot translator. In other words, I give the compiler a big pile of instructions specified in the high-level programming language, if, then, for, next, that sort of thing. And the compiler takes the entire pile of input instructions and goes through each one and go, okay, I'll translate every single one of these instructions or program into machine code where the processor understands. Okay? So when you install a program on a PC or on your cell phone, or on any type of computer, you're actually installing programs already translated into the form that the processor understands. Is that okay so far? So if you want to switch a processor, okay, and still run Windows, ideally speaking, all that Microsoft has to do is to give the same big pile of instruction in high-level programming language to a different compiler. Instead of giving it to a compiler that translates to Intel instructions, it can give it to another compiler that can translate it to the Cortex instruction set, right? But that is a little bit difficult for Microsoft. I do not know technically why. but it is difficult for Microsoft to switch platforms, to switch processors. Whereas in Linux, people do it all day long. They can. This is what we call the cross compile, or compile Linux for different types of processors. Every time Microsoft tried to do something like that, it's always a flop. So that's why they always go back to the Intel architecture.
Like Linux versus Windows processors. With Linux, if you change your hardware, it's not a big deal. Like it can run. It'll still run. It'll be fine. But with Windows, if like you go from an i5 to an i7, Windows will crash as soon as you start it up, and you have to.
Really?
Yes. It blue screens of death. Like when I redid my computer, I went from an AMD processor to an i7, and it crashed as soon as I went in, because whenever you do a new chipset, or it has to be reconfigured, and Windows can't do that on the fly. You can't reconfigure.
That sounds like a
Or
design
reprogram.
issue more than anything
Well,
else.
actually, my brother did that. We switched his AMD to an i7, and it seemed to work fine. He's like, "Well, I didn't reinstall Windows yet. I should probably do that."
It's like hit or miss.
That is just weird because
I wasn't sure how it was working.
because in Linux, if you run the 486 or 686 version of Linux, it will just run. It may not be able to use all the features of a particular processor, but it will still run. So I think a lot of that has to do with the architecture of the Windows, empire of software. They never really this never crossed their mind when they wrote the software to begin with.
I think it's poor insight.
Yep. All right. Well, we are running out of time, so we will begin on chapter 2 on Thursday, and I will postpone the homework, so it is due next Tuesday. That will give you a little bit more time to set up for Cengage. I can answer some questions about that.
I signed up with Cengage and everything, but